Celeste Barber was not the kind of person who easily let things go. She had devoted 7 years of her life to the advertising company, Creative Minds, where she considered not only her work, but also her second home when she first joined. Celeste was just a junior employee full of enthusiasm, but lacking experience, yet with diligence and a sharp eye for visual details. She quickly made a strong impression on the senior executives. Over the years, she rose through the ranks, eventually becoming one of the company's leading marketing experts, spearheading some of the most successful campaigns the company had seen in recent years. Her job was now much easier. Late nights and early mornings spent with her team in long, grueling battles had become a routine Celeste was accustomed to. There was no time left for herself. All of her time was dedicated to the company. The campaigns she led not only brought Creative Minds great success, but also opened doors to even greater opportunities. Yet, despite all of this, during those months, Celeste had never felt so alone. She had a group of design colleagues, among whom Emily, a colleague Celeste had mentored for the past 3 years, stood out. Emily was always the first to send Celeste compliments after a successful campaign. Celeste took pride in having helped Emily improve, but no matter how tired one got, someone still had to carry the weight of it all. Within the company, no matter how successful she became, there was always the lingering feeling that she was just a worker, unseen and unappreciated. Colleagues admired her, but none of them ever reached out when Celeste needed help. She was always the one to step forward and take responsibility for every failure, working in silence without asking for praise or recognition. That's why, when a huge opportunity finally emerged within the company, Celeste put all her trust and hopes into this project. The largest service campaign the company had ever undertaken was approved, and Celeste was tasked with leading the entire marketing strategy for this new product. She saw this as her chance, not only to prove her worth, but also to reclaim what she had lost. She poured herself into the project, immersing herself in every number, every strategy, and every partnership. She believed this was her moment to show that she was more than just the person working behind the scenes. She was the creator, the leader, the one behind the real success. However, things did not go as she had imagined. Everything changed in a single morning. Celeste received a call she never expected. Mark, the CEO of the company, whom she had always seen as an older brother, asked to see her in his office. During the meeting, Celeste was told that, instead of her. Emily, her colleague, whom she had mentored for years, would be taking the lead on the campaign. Celeste was so shocked she could not even respond. She tried to ask why, but Mark calmly told her that this was the final decision, that Emily was better suited to manage the project. Celeste felt as if she had been struck. She had worked tirelessly all this time, and yet all of her efforts seemed to have meant nothing. Emily, the very person Celeste had helped, was now taking the credit without even a word of thanks. Celeste couldn't believe her ears. But the worst part was the reaction from those around her. Her colleagues, whom she had considered friends, the ones she had supported through campaign season, didn't even show the slightest empathy. In fact, some expressed joy when they learned Celeste had been removed from the project. They turned away without a second glance, and no one stood up to defend or help her. Celeste, in that moment of clarity, felt completely abandoned. She had been betrayed, belittled, and once again, she realized how naive she had been to trust others. The feeling of betrayal lingered throughout the day. She returned home to the silence of the night, with no explanation from anyone, her family. The people she had always thought would be her rock couldn't even comprehend her pain. Her mother only asked if she could send some money, while her father, upon seeing her face, let out a sharp remark as she entered the house. working for a big company and still can't keep your position. What a disappointment. Every word was like a knife cutting into her heart, and she felt as if she were on the edge, no longer anyone's priority. The loneliness was overwhelming. The sense of abandonment came not only from her company, but from her family, the people she had devoted herself to. Celeste sat in her dim apartment, with a cup of coffee in front of her mind in turmoil. Everything she had worked for seemed to disappear in an instant, like a storm sweeping away sand. She looked at her computer screen, where emails from colleagues and managers kept flooding in, each with new updates, each reminding her of her recent failure. She shut down her computer, but she couldn't shake the feeling of constant ringing in her ears. She had lost everything, not just her career, but also her trust in the people she had once given her all to. But then, as the night fell, with no one around, Celeste suddenly realized that she was the one who could change everything. Though she no longer had faith in the company or her family, she still had the power to choose her own path. She could rise or she could fall. But one thing was certain: she would not let herself be defeated like this. You said after the shock Celeste had just experienced. The days that followed passed in a quiet atmosphere, with nothing seeming to change except for the realization that her life was no longer as peaceful as it once was. The morning after, when the first rays of sunlight streamed through the window, Celeste woke up not with the feeling of happiness or excitement she used to have, but with an emptiness so cold it consumed her. She sat up, feeling the cold draft from the window sweeping in, washing away all the sweet memories of her years at the company, the late nights, and the moments when she truly felt alive. She was no longer that person. Now, Celeste was simply a woman who had lost everything, abandoned in a world filled with nothing but deceit. However, as she sank deeper into sorrow, Celeste realized something important. She could not keep living in disappointment. Though the words of Mark, Emily, and her colleagues still echoed in her mind, she began to reimagine herself, questioning what she truly wanted. She knew she had to rise up, to fight. But how could she begin again from scratch when everything seemed to have ended? Each morning, when she woke up, Celeste started with the simplest tasks, organizing her living space, cleaning up piles of papers unrelated to work, sorting through things that had been forgotten in the corners of her closet. As she worked at home, sometimes she would pause, gazing out the window where the morning light shone down, as if it was trying to dispel the darkness. She was not a weak person. She was not someone who could be easily walked over. And so, she decided to act in the days that followed. Celeste began looking for new opportunities. However, this wasn't easy. After leaving the company, she was no longer someone the industry relationships were eager to embrace. She realized that all those years of giving so much to the company had caused her to forget who she was outside of work. People remembered Celeste as the diligent worker, but not as someone with independent creativity. In meetings with old friends, she felt like a stranger, like a shadow in her own life. But each time she went out, she remembered that she had made a decision not to let anyone belittle her anymore. With every conversation, Celeste felt the weakness in herself reflected in the eyes of those around her. The compliments she had once received now felt like meaningless questions, empty of real substance. Yet, even as she felt lost among these relationships, she refused to give up. Whenever she felt like she was losing direction, Celeste reminded herself that this was just a phase, a challenge, and that she needed to keep fighting. At the same time, Celeste also began searching for new job opportunities, but she didn't want to just settle for any mundane job just to have an income. She knew that if she did that, she would forever remain a worker in her own life. So, Celeste decided to go the route of self-employment with her extensive marketing experience. She began searching for smaller projects and gradually built up a personal portfolio. The days of self-employment were not easy. She had to work on her own, without colleagues by her side, without the support of a big company. But it was during these difficult times that Celeste began to feel herself regaining her strength. Each small, successful project made her feel proud. Every email from a client, every call from a partner was a signal of her revival. During these days of self-employment, Celeste didn't stop improving herself. She sought out online marketing courses, attended workshops on advertising strategies, and actively connected with people who could help her learn every day. She did something that brought her closer to her goal, although self-employment didn't always bring in stable income to Celeste. That wasn't the most important thing at the moment. What mattered was that she could feel the healing energy within herself, a restoration of the strength that had been burned out in the past. Then, after several months of working on her own, an unexpected opportunity arose. A large client in the marketing industry reached out to Celeste, asking her to help them build an advertising strategy for an international project. This was the opportunity Celeste had been waiting for, and she knew that now was the time to prove that she could rise again after the broken events of the past. But just as she began to take on the work, another shock hit her. It was Emily, the very person Celeste had helped and mentored for all those years, who had now become her competitor. She wasn't just involved in the client's project, but had secured a larger deal, making Celeste feel like all her efforts had been in vain. But instead of giving up, Celeste decided to view this as a challenge. She knew that this was the moment for her to prove that she could go further, stronger, not just because of what she had lost, but because of what she would build in the future. This situation made Celeste realize that she not only needed to work harder, but also needed to change her perspective on life and work. She understood that she needed to learn how to stand firm, not only in her career, but also in her relationships. Every failure, every hardship, every attempt to try again made Celeste stronger. But she couldn't help but ask herself, was she strong enough to overcome the challenges ahead? Celeste relentlessly pushed forward each day, navigating the path of independence and challenge. After securing the major deal with an international client, she threw herself into her work, determined not only to complete the task, but to surpass her own expectations. Each morning, when she woke up, she felt a renewed sense of strength within herself. Even though everything seemed to be working against her, she was no longer afraid. With every passing thought of Emily's betrayal, Celeste couldn't help but smile faintly, as if the bitterness had become her source of power. She knew she could no longer be the abandoned one, and she refused to let herself sink into failure forever. But her career didn't just change through personal effort. It also evolved as she began to shift her perspective on relationships. Celeste began to forge new connections, reaching out to influential figures in the marketing industry that she had never even considered before. One day, during an unexpected meeting, she met the owner of a large creative company, one that she had once dreamed of working for. This individual saw not just a hard worker, but recognized the true potential in Celeste. They invited her to join a project that would showcase her talents and give her an opportunity to prove herself. However, things weren't easy. At the same time, Celeste noticed fierce competition from none other than Emily. Less than a week after Celeste signed the major international deal, she was informed that Emily had secured an even bigger deal with the same client. It felt like a game to Emily, Celeste, once a prominent figure in the company, was slowly becoming a fading presence in many people's eyes, while Emily, with her safe strategies, climbed the ranks quickly. For Celeste, this was the moment to face the toughest challenges of her career, but rather than submitting, she remained undeterred for the first time in years. Celeste understood that work wasn't just about unconditional devotion. This was where she had to prove her worth, to fight not only for her personal goals, but also for what she truly deserved. She no longer waited for validation from others, but began rebuilding everything from the broken pieces that had been scattered around her. Things took a more intense turn when Emily began making questionable moves. One day, while Celeste was tracking the progress of a campaign she knew she had rightfully earned, she discovered that Emily was attempting to falsify figures, hiding the gaps in the campaign she was managing. At first, Celeste was just surprised, but then she gradually realized that Emily's dishonesty might be the very thing that would bring her down. Not only was Emily neglecting her responsibilities, but she was also relying on dishonest tactics to take credit for the hard work of others. In that moment, Celeste felt a strong surge rise within her. She knew she couldn't let herself be passive any longer. She had to do something to oppose those who had betrayed her. Over the following days, Celeste quietly began collecting information. She wasn't doing this to bring anyone down, but simply to protect her own sense of justice. She sought out hidden data, uncovered inaccurate reports Emily had provided to clients, and found evidence of unprofessional conduct in the campaign she had led. During this process, Celeste realized that she not only had to face Emily, but also the larger power structure that she had once been a part of. However, Celeste was not afraid. She understood that if she wanted to regain recognition, she had to act strategically and fight with intelligence. A week later, as reports of Emily's campaign continued to reflect failures, the company began to show signs of instability. Clients were frustrated with the campaign's quality and the critical mistakes in strategy. It was then that Celeste no longer stayed silent. She had quietly prepared a detailed report, exposing all the errors in the campaign Emily had managed. She also didn't hesitate to share information about how Emily had falsified data to avoid taking responsibility. Finally, Celeste sent this report to the company's upper management along with a piece of advice. If this company wants to maintain its credibility, it needs to address this issue seriously. Just as Celeste had anticipated, her report created a significant stir within the company. Senior leadership began investigating the root causes of the problem, and Emily couldn't escape the scrutiny. The flaws in her process were gradually revealed. Although Emily tried to cover up and fix other aspects of the campaign, the truth was clear. Her colleagues also began to notice Emily's actions, and the relationships within the company started to crack. Not long after, Emily was reassigned to a less important project, and her career began to falter. Meanwhile, Celeste continued to work diligently. Unaffected by what had happened, she didn't need to confront Emily directly because the results spoke for themselves. The success she achieved with her clients, the projects that flourished under her leadership, these were the true victories. But for Celeste, the most important thing was that she had proven her real value, not through praise, but through tangible results and decisive actions. Each day, Celeste felt a subtle shift within herself. After successfully addressing the flaws in Emily's strategies, she was no longer someone who relied on anyone or any external factors. She had built her foundation herself, not through reflection or creative brilliance alone, but through deliberate actions, each step driven by focused intent. Then, after months of quiet dedication to her personal projects, an unexpected phone call changed everything. On that day, Celeste was sitting in her small office, preparing for a meeting with a new client. She had never quite gotten used to this feeling, the freedom of not having to fight through long struggles with old colleagues or the decisions of a distant hierarchy. Her work was now hers alone, unshaped by manipulation or outside interference. Just then, her phone rang, an unfamiliar number. She hesitated, but, after a moment of thought, decided to answer. It was Mark, the former CEO of her old company. Celeste was slightly surprised, as it had been quite a while since she'd left the company. But Mark wasn't calling to catch up or offer an apology. He got straight to the point. "Celeste, I know you've done an excellent job uncovering the mistakes in Emily's strategies. I think it's time for you to come back. The company is in serious trouble, and we need someone like you to step in." The offer was nothing like the ones she had heard in the past. Celeste couldn't help but feel a twinge of surprise, but more than that, it made her realize that what she had done over the past months had earned her recognition. Celeste didn't immediately decide. While the call opened up a huge opportunity, she couldn't forget the past, the betrayal, the disregard. But in that moment, a thought began to form in her mind. She didn't need to go back for any reason other than her own. She had proven to herself that she could rise without anyone's help. If she returned, it would be on her terms, not because of someone else's invitation. When the call ended, Celeste sat there for a long time, reflecting on everything she had been through. She realized that the struggles of the past months had helped her grow in ways she had never anticipated. She was no longer the girl who stood at the door of her old company, dreaming of a future yet to come. Now, she was a confident woman, strong enough to start over, even to break past boundaries she once thought were unattainable. Finally, Celeste made her decision. She would go back, but not because of Mark or because of Emily. She would return because of herself. This was her moment to prove that she could succeed without returning to an old game, but rather as a new, stronger, more confident person. Most importantly, she would return to make sure that her value was recognized. She would return, but this time not to take up the forgotten work. She would return from a higher position and bring real value to both herself and the company. When she announced that she would be coming back to work, Celeste didn't try to make amends with Emily or any of those who had betrayed her. She simply said she would bring a new strategy, a new way of working, and, of course, there would be no room for power games or complacency. Celeste understood that she would have to prove herself not through words, but through results. And that was how she would reclaim her recognition from those who had once underestimated her. When she returned to the company, there was no grand welcome, no applause, no fanfare. No one truly cared that she had come back. But Celeste knew that what mattered was that she had returned to do something bigger, to prove that she could succeed without relying on anyone else, that she was no longer the person caught in old struggles. As she began her new work, Celeste didn't feel the need to prove herself to anyone. She started rebuilding the company's marketing strategy, creating a completely new plan that completely changed the approach to the outdated methods the company had used. She realized that for the company to succeed, it needed to change its thinking, its way of doing things. And of course, these decisions weren't easy. She had to face pushback from familiar faces, former colleagues, and people she had once built successful campaigns with. But this time, Celeste didn't back down. She knew change was necessary, and she would be the one to initiate it. Gradually, people in the company began to notice the shift in Celeste's strategy. They started to implement her plans, and a new wave of success began. Clients became increasingly satisfied, and advertising campaigns began achieving results beyond expectations. Step by step, Celeste rose from the hardships, not only reclaiming recognition, but also building her own empire within the company, an empire where she had the authority to make decisions. By this point, Emily, the one Celeste had once mentored, was no longer a familiar name. Everything that was now attributed to Celeste was not just as part of the company, but as the mastermind behind a new strategy, the creator of success. She no longer needed to confront Emily or anyone else directly. The results spoke for themselves. There was no longer any room for those who had once looked down on her in the game Celeste had created. Celeste stood before the window of her office, gazing out at the morning sun filtering through the trees. She was no longer the person she once was. The days when she felt betrayed, cast aside, and pushed to the bottom were now fading memories. The pain of being abandoned and driven down had lost its grip on her. In Celeste's mind, there was only one goal now, not revenge, but proof that she could succeed, not only through personal victories, but by building true value from the smallest of things. When she returned to the company, there was no fanfare or warm welcome. She didn't need that. She understood that recognition was not something bought with compliments. It had to be earned through results. And Celeste did just that. She didn't voice her grievances or try to criticize those who had betrayed her. Instead, she quietly created new strategies, powerful plans that no one could oppose. The building blocks of change started falling into place. Clients returned, revenue grew, and respect from her colleagues slowly but surely began to be restored. With each campaign executed, success followed beyond expectations. The marketing strategies Celeste crafted were not only innovative, but also yielded exceptional results, shifting the way many people viewed her. There was no need for confrontation. Through clear results, Celeste proved she was a true strategist. She was no longer the one left behind. Everything she had built in the days before became a powerful testament to her rapid comeback. As Emily, the person Celeste had once helped, began to face failure in her own work, the signs were unmistakable. She began to encounter difficulties she hadn't faced before. Despite receiving support from the company, Emily's campaigns no longer attracted client interest. And more than once, she was asked to revise or completely overhaul the strategies she had proposed. Despite her attempts to justify and correct the situation, nothing could save her. Clients turned away, partners began exploring other options, and ultimately, Emily's position within the company grew increasingly unstable. Meanwhile, Celeste continued to develop new strategies, achieving superior results without the need for direct confrontation. At this point, Celeste didn't feel satisfaction or a sense of victory. She didn't need that. What mattered to her was seeing the positive impact of her work on both her career and the company. She no longer needed to prove anything because the numbers and results spoke for themselves. Her rise was not a temporary win. It was a firm confirmation of her lasting value. While Emily stumbled due to her flawed strategies, Celeste stood firm, building a solid foundation not only for herself, but also for those around her. However, Celeste's powerful comeback was not just about her work. She realized that success wasn't just about numbers or fame. It was about building lasting relationships. She no longer sought validation from those who had abandoned her. Instead, she began forging new, meaningful connections with people who truly understood and respected what she did. Her conversations were no longer superficial. They were genuine discussions about sustainable growth and the larger goals Celeste wished to achieve in the future. When Emily was moved to a different position, Celeste didn't feel joy. She didn't want to see anyone fail, especially someone who had once been her colleague, but she understood that in this world, only those who truly contributed and added value could last in the long term. Emily had her chance, but because of her lack of integrity and foresight, she had lost everything. Celeste didn't want to gloat or criticize, for she knew that everyone has an opportunity to change. However, only those strong enough to show up, to adapt, could truly change themselves and rebuild their lives. In the end, when everything was settled, Celeste realized that her success didn't just come from her work, but from the lessons she had learned throughout this journey. Every failure, every betrayal, every moment she felt powerless had been invaluable lessons that helped her grow. She didn't let herself be defeated. She didn't let the wounds linger. And when she looked back, Celeste felt that she had risen not to prove anything, but because she understood that true value lies in relentless perseverance, never giving up, and never returning to those who had hurt her. As the story came to an end, Celeste didn't need to say a word. Everything she had done, everything she had overcome, stood as proof of the rise of a strong woman. No need for retaliation, no need for bitterness, just peace, depth, and strength. She didn't need to look back to prove her victory. What she had now was the result of relentless effort, unwavering belief in herself, and a steady focus on her goals. And as the light finally streamed through her office window, Celeste gave a small, contented smile. She didn't need to take revenge. Success was the sweetest form of retaliation,